How much backstory do you want to include in your novel? How much is important to have so that the reader understands what happened before your story started? We're going to talk about that today and why I believe that it's important to include some backstory, but not too much backstory. You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world. Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction author and I also enjoy sharing writing tips with you. I have a blog, I have my YouTube channel, and I also have courses on how to write. So check them all out. So let's start today. What we're going to talk about is backstory. So backstory, what is it? Backstory is everything that has happened to your character before you start your story. So it's the character's history. It's the character's past. It's the events, the emotions, all the things that the character has experienced before the event that starts your story. So there are two things I want to talk about. One is what you should know as the writer, and the other thing is what the reader should know. And it is very different, mostly because you as the writer really need to understand who the character is and all the events that did happen in order to understand the character's motivation for what is happening now and what the character is doing right now. Your reader will also need to know that, but not to the extent. Okay, so let me give you an example. So my previous book that I just wrote and published last year was titled This Is Now. And the book prior to that, that was then, had all the same characters. Now, with This Is Now, I don't know that somebody read the previous book. I don't know that somebody actually read them in order, right? That they read the first one and then they read the second one. I have to assume that nobody has read the previous book and that they're just picking up this book now and just meeting these characters now. So if that's the case, then there were a lot of things that happened in the past that the reader doesn't know. Well, how much of that is important in this new book? What do they need to know? Well, there were a number of things that happened. This book actually begins with the main character's mother being sick with cancer, and she gets a call that her mother is, again, that the cancer has come back, and this time it's fatal, and that she only has a few months to live. And so she gets a call from her sister to come back, so to leave her ordinary life and to return to her home, right, where she grew up. Now, part of the story is that she didn't get along very well with her mom or her dad, her parents. She had a lot of issues, and she also did not like her hometown. So returning to a place where there were tons of bad memories was not good for her. So the character does need to understand why that is. So it's not enough for me to say, well, yeah, she doesn't really want to go back because she had a bad childhood. It's not enough. The readers are going to want to know a little bit more. Now, they don't have to know, again, as much as I do. So I knew all the past. I knew all the things that had happened to her as a child. I knew all of that. I was able to include some of that into the new book, but not everything, because not all of it was significant enough that the reader needed to know every little detail of what created this character. But they do need to have some idea, because otherwise they don't understand, really. Why am I doing this? Why is this character reacting the way that she is? She just doesn't seem to be a very likable person if the character doesn't understand kind of what is motivating her reactions and her emotions. But even writers who feel that the backstory really isn't as important do need to understand, at least themselves, what happened in the past. Now, there are writers that will create an elaborate past for the characters. They might create, an entire notebook with everything that has happened to this character since the time that she was a child, and what her favorite ice cream was and who her friends were and what elementary school and high school she went to, and did she go to college. So all of this, right? So they write an entire book of this character's life and the other contributing characters as well, the other characters in the story. And there may be a place for that. So, and especially if writers are writing books with continuing characters, you don't want to forget something that you had said previously, or in larger sagas where, again, there's going to be a huge jump in time, and we're going to learn about the grandparents and the great grandparents and so forth, then, you might need sort of this Bible of this family so that you can remember everything that has happened to them. But for the most part, you don't need that much information, but you need to know something. Okay. So one of the things that I do, and and I don't know, and I don't even recommend that people do it this way. This is just the way that I do it, because I find that I don't really need a huge book of past. I have enough that I know some of the events that happened in the past, and I know the history of the family, again, a little bit. I don't have details as far as like the high school she went to and all of this stuff, unless it's relevant, okay? And then in some books it has been. But what I do is I get to a point where I think I need to explain something, like, why is the character doing this? And I ask myself that, okay, knowing what I know about this character's past, why would she, whatever, maybe, why would she dislike dogs? Why would she dislike children? Why would she have that reaction? Okay, so then I need to create a reason for that. I need to go back and write this into her past history. So at some point this happened, and this is the reason that she's reacting this way, and it needs to make sense, right? It needs to make sense in her past, and it needs to make sense now in the present. So again, as it happens in my book, I tend to go back and fill in the backstory. And again, I'm not recommending it because it might not work for some people. Like, some people may really want to know exactly what happens. And that might help them actually to write the conflicts and the problems in the present. Okay, so then you can kind of see now that the reason that we want backstory, so what is the reason? Why do we want to include backstory? And why do we want to understand it and know it? The first and most important reason is motivation. We need to make sure that we explain the motivation of the character. Anything that the character does needs to be explained by an experience in the past. Now, if we think of real people, okay, in real life, people are very random. Like, we do things because sometimes we just feel like doing them. And sometimes there is no explanation, or at least in our own minds, we don't know the reason why we're doing something, right? There's always a reason. But it might be a subconscious reason that we as human beings do not understand, right? Or sometimes it's just a random thing, right? That we just decide we're going to do one day. But unfortunately, you can't do that with your fake, characters or protagonists in a story. Anytime that they do something or they behave in a certain way, we have to be able to explain why they do it. Because then if it seems random, you're going to lose your reader. The reader doesn't really want that in the story. They want to understand, like, why is this character doing this? It doesn't make sense, right? The character goes off and, and does something really bizarre. We want to understand, like, where is this coming from? Why did this character choose to do this? It doesn't make sense. Most people wouldn't do that. Why is this character doing this? So the reason that we want to bring backstory in and we want to filter it into our story is because of that. We want to show the motivation for the character's behavior. Okay, that's not to say that every behavior is because of a past event. So let's say, for example, that a character really, really wants to make a lot of money. They're really motivated to make a lot of money. They're working really hard. They're putting in tons of hours. They are never satisfied with how much money they're making. They're just, this is like their obsession of being wealthy. Okay, we could say that it's because of a past event. We could say that maybe he was very poor as a child and now he never wants to be poor again. Or we could say that he is, maybe it was the opposite. Maybe he comes from a very, very wealthy family and his, was never enough for his father, and he wants to prove that he can be just as just as successful as his dad. So it could be a past kind of thing, right? But it doesn't always have to be. Sometimes the motivation for something comes from the present. So it could be that this character, something has happened. This character is about to lose his home, his business, or something right now, and he needs to, he's very, very motivated to get a lot of money because he needs to take care of this current debt that he has so that he doesn't lose his life, his family, his everything, right? So, but if it does come from the past, you do need to include that and fill the reader in on that backstory. So how do we include the backstory then? How do we do this in a good, effective, elegant way, so that doesn't feel like, okay, let me dump some of this backstory into this story? That's what you don't want to do, right? You don't want to make it feel like, okay, let's, hold on, pause, let me tell you about the past. That's what you don't want. You want it to flow very naturally. There's different ways to do it. Some people actually have a little prologue at the beginning of a story where they have a scene from the past, right? They have something that happens in the past. They write it as a scene, and then jump to the present, and they start the story. And over time, that original prologue starts to make sense. Like, oh, I see why this character is making these decisions and doing these things because of that event that happened at that prologue in the past, right? So that's one way of doing it. It's just have a prologue in the beginning. If it's only like one major thing that is going to impact this whole story, that makes sense. You can have a prologue that's going to show, that you're going to show over time how, how this current story is working out because of that past event. Okay, another way that you can do it is by having flashbacks, right? So you're moving towards your story, and all of a sudden, something happens and it triggers something in your character, and your character flashes back or thinks back to an event, or even just says within the story, I remember the last time this happened. Maybe she walks into, she walks into a funeral, and that triggers something in her mind, right? And she thinks, I remember the last time I was at a funeral, and this is what happened. So the flashbacks are scenes that take you out of the current story and they take you into the past, and then usually develop as a scene from the past, and then you move forward again. They're not the best because oftentimes readers are really invested in the story that you're telling them now. They don't really want to go back in time and relive something that happened. They want to know what happened, excuse me, but they don't really want to go back and leave this story and go into a different story. So use it sparingly, or if it's going to be a continual flashback where you're really having two stories running side by side, then that might be okay because they are actually invested in both stories. But if it's just maybe one or two flashbacks that you're going to have, make them work really well. Because again, readers don't really love them very much. Okay, the next way that you can add backstory is through dialogue. And that seems to work pretty well. Like, most people really don't even notice that you are doing a backstory kind of thing. But as characters are speaking about something, characters can fill each other in. And as long as you're not like, oh, remember when we did this? And, again, it's something that you have to kind of tactfully add in so that the reader doesn't really realize it. They're just kind of following the dialogue and the story back and forth. And as the characters speak, they start to realize, oh, wow, yeah, so this character had a brother. So this character once was a teacher, So whatever it is that you're trying to filter into the new story, you can do that through dialogue. And again, it can be kind of an effortless thing if it's well done, and the reader just kind of enjoys listening to the conversation and learning a little bit about what happened in the past without really knowing that you're like, here, this is what happened in the past. Okay, and then not the last way, I'm sure there are more, but just the last way that I want to mention today is just you telling as the narrator, right? The narrator is just telling the reader something. So maybe the reader walks into a funeral and just basically thinks this, right? Or tells herself, I hope this is better than the last time, because the last time that I went to a funeral, I passed out or whatever happened, right? So what the narrator is doing is they're just telling you something. In the past when this happened, or I'm very nervous about this. I'm very nervous about going to see my father. I haven't seen my father in 25 years. And the last time that we spoke, we had this argument. And, without going into the full scene of the past, you're just filling the reader in, just telling them a few things about that, and only enough so that they understand why the character is feeling the way they're feeling or doing what they're doing. Okay. So the whole thing about backstory is that you as the writer want to be clear that you need to understand what happened to these characters. You need to think of these characters as if they are real humans, right? Real people, and in order to explain to your story to your audience, you need to tell them like who these people are. Think about any time that you're introducing somebody to someone else. You're not going to go into their full book's backstory, of course, but you often introduce people by how you met or something that you did together, right? So, hey, this is my best friend. We went to middle school and high school together. We used to whatever, right? We used to go to football games and do all these things together. So so here, tell her about your cheerleading days. I bet you she'd love to hear about it. So we introduce people by giving the new person a little backstory, a little information about them, so that they can have a relationship and kind of be able to connect. That's the same thing you're doing in a story. You're telling the reader, hey, let me tell you a little bit about why she's acting this way. Let me introduce you to her a little bit so that you will understand who this character is. Okay? So think of backstory as something like that, just letting the reader know a little bit and you knowing a lot more. Okay? I hope that this helps. If it does, please hit the like button and the share button, and come back and see me next Friday for my next writing tip.